Beloved, I welcome you to this sacred space with all the drama that is fitting for a day like this. This day when we honor the life of David Parrish, for his fingers will be on everything that occurs this hour. For this was, as many of us know, what he pejoratively called his great final lesson plan. It's my hope that in this hour we could appreciate the particularity of a life lived as we hear words and tributes and aspects about Dave's approach and philosophy as a teacher and as a human being. But to hold that in this greater container, which is the grace of the living God, who receives Dave into the great cloud of witnesses. And if you know anything about that verse in the Bible, in the book of Hebrews, the cloud of witnesses watches down upon us who are still mortal, encouraging us. And if there's ever a day when I think the cloud of witnesses will be looking down and smiling, it will be this morning. For a service that Dave wanted very much to be a gift to the community on where he sensed the transcendence and the joy of being alive. So I hope you can receive it as a gift, even in the midst of grief and release. Let us sing one of the great hymns of the church together. You'll find it in the hymnal directed for all the saints. And I would like to ask you to stand as we sing this hymn of praise. This morning we're going to hear sacred words. Some of them are words from Holy Scripture, and some of them are words from wise poets. A passage from the First Testament that Dave wanted read today. There is a season for everything, a time for every matter under the heavens, a time for giving birth and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting what's planted, a time for killing and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for crying and a time for laughing, a time for mourning and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing, a time for avoiding embraces, a time for keeping silent, a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war, a time for peace. I want to offer one other brief passage which I got to share with Dave the last week he was in this realm, and it meant something to him. And I think it is a great, profound passage, Jeremiah 29:11, for any of us who know struggle. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace and not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope, so that when you call me and come and pray to me, I will listen to you. When you search for me, yes, search for me with all your heart, you will find me. I will be present for you, declares the Lord, and I will end your captivity. Blessed be the hearing of these words of life. And now words from the poet.
Time. This place and time is all I know. Behind is past, ahead is go. Eternity's both, with me between. This slice I know is thin and lean. This place and time is little more than what it takes to close a door. The sharpest note a cricket sings, the flicking of a wild bird's wing. I'll not regret that left behind. What lies ahead, I will not mind. 7 in the woods. Am I as old as I am? Maybe not. Time is a mystery that can tip us upside down. Yesterday, I was 7 in the woods, a bandage covering my blind eye. In a bedroll Mother made me so I could sleep out in the woods, far from people. A garter snake glided by without noticing me. A chickadee landed on my bare toe, so light she wasn't believable. The night had been long and the treetops thick with 1,000,000,000 stars. Who was I, half blind on the forest floor? Who was I at age 7? 68 years later, I can still inhabit that boy's body without thinking of the time between. It is the burden of life to be many ages without seeing the end of time.
Let's hear some words and some stories now of people who were very endeared to Dave's life. I'd like to first recognize Lynn Salathiel to come forward and offer his remarks.
This is what Mohandas Gandhi said. Live as if you were to die tomorrow, but learn as if you were to live forever. And these words from Kenya. Learning never ends until you have dirt in your ears. And of course, the great American composer, conductor, and teacher Leonard Bernstein said this: to achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. These words all seem to me to speak to David's fierce innovation in education. Never one to be satisfied with a standard method, David was forever an innovator and a pragmatist. We saw this in his approach to teaching our students both in the humanities program at Central High School and in Mary and Dave's work with young choir members who were brand new to singing and therefore needed a special guidance and gentle understanding. And I am proud to say that Dave and I taught together for 36 years. Among Dave's greatest influences was an educator and education philosopher named Howard Gardner, who was a teacher at Harvard's Graduate School of Education and is perhaps best known for his theory of multiple intelligences. There is no single way to convey knowledge to students, Gardner said. He believed that intelligence wasn't a single inherited entity, but that we all have multiple intelligences independent of each other. David passionately believed this and made sure he accounted for multiple methods of learning in his classes. I'll mention only one as evidence. Dave created a famous humanities class lesson on the family based on junk, or as David would say, based on artifacts that he and the family found in a crawl space under their old farmhouse on Silver Lake Road. Bottles, old cans, apple peelers, cherry pitters, signs, medicine bottles from Waite's drugstore on Front Street from the 1800s, buckets, batteries, hundreds of things. David wrote a very creative lesson for our 4 classrooms of students in T-building that involved students moving from room to room in order to observe and note-take on all of these artifacts, hundreds. Then students discussed with each other their notes and began making inferences about this family, what they might have been like, and even what these artifacts told them about old Traverse City. It was a lesson that did so much more than just show students old physical items from 125 years ago. Dave's lesson gave students permission to be detectives about the past. It gave them permission to investigate real stuff from the past, to actually pick up and examine the artifacts and speculate about them with each other. I won't mention that part of the lesson, which also included a real bear skin that Dave and Mary found wrapped up in their garage after they bought the house from this pioneer TC family, the Cratavilles, all those years ago. Or how we briefly reenacted in the high school auditorium with over 100 students the bear hunt that the kids read about in an old Record Eagle article, complete with a picture of the bear and the hunters, who were mostly Crataville men, and how they shot it. Or how David, and this is the interesting part, or how David brought into school his 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun that was the same weapon as one of the weapons that was in the old photo. We dressed like the hunters, complete with boots, hunting jackets, and axe, and of course, Dave's 12 gauge. Walking back to T-building after we did that lesson in the auditorium, Dave carrying his 12 gauge and me carrying a double-bladed axe, it didn't even raise an eyebrow. But it was clearly a different era. Our humanities department under Dave's direction became a virtual lab for Howard Gardner's ideas about how to transmit knowledge. Hands-on, moving around, large and small group discussions, making inferences, forming reasonable conclusions based on their observations. In short, the multiple intelligences route to knowledge. As I went back to review Gardner's ideas this last couple of weeks, I was surprised to discover that both he and David were born in the same year, 1943, and only months apart. They truly were two educators who thought alike. When David retired from TCAPS, we teamed up again to teach classes through NMC's Extended Education Services. We created classes in the fine arts that were sometimes based on material that we had first crafted for our high school humanities students. Now, we were directing similar material to older learners who perhaps wanted to expand their interests in architecture or music or drama or poetry. And because Dave loved researching any subject connected with the arts, and because he had such a grand collection of music and paintings, these and many more, of course he had books about everything, we never suffered for a lack of ideas about what kind of courses to put together. Mozart or Monet, Bach or Beethoven, Bernstein, Stravinsky, Aaron Copland, the Wyeth family of painters, these and many more, including American musicals, became our focus. And for nearly 15 more years, we presented the material that we loved to an almost always enthusiastic group of senior students without the threat of tests or homework or pop quizzes. Just the joy of sharing some of the world's great art with like-minded souls. So clearly David was a most unique teacher, fierce and formidable, yet amazingly patient and always fair. Like the great teachers, I believe, when he was teaching, he was also learning. Combining this with his own personal brand of energy and enthusiasm, you discovered how he turned kids on to learning. But like one of his musical heroes, Leonard Bernstein, David simply ran out of time. But let's remember that even at the end, he had a few days left to design this one last lesson plan. Farewell and thank you, Brother David, for the opportunity to be your dear friend and teaching colleague.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Cobb. It's an honor to be before you today to share a few thoughts and memories about my friend and colleague and mentor, Dave Parrish. I first met Dave in 1998 when I was directing the choirs at Central High School, and he had just returned to his role as the music department chair, a role he had held previously. After he retired from TCAPS, Dave and I remained in contact here at Central Church and through our work with the chancel choir. Then in 2011, I was honored to be invited to join the children's choir team. And that opportunity allowed me to work with Dave and Mary and get to know them better. Within the NMC Children's Choir faculty, my fellow directors, Stephanie, Todd, Joanna, Ashley, and I, we had a saying, what would Dave do? Now, Dave may not have known that this was a thing because this started after he retired, but it was a question we asked ourselves whenever we faced a big issue or concern. When we found ourselves facing one of these big challenges, inevitably, one of us would turn to the other and say, what would Dave do? So in my humble effort to honor Dave's legacy, I thought I would try to illustrate his immense and lasting impact by sharing a few answers to that question. What would Dave do? Dave would approach everything with joy and wonder. We can all picture Dave's infectious grin. That smile was a constant, even as his health and body were failing him. Dave was so wonderful about sharing the joy and wonder with his students and singers. If his children's choir was singing a song about a wren, you know he had many beautiful pictures of wrens there to show the students. Dave was able to see the intrinsic beauty and artistry in everything around him. He would also bring joy and a touch of silliness to rehearsals by using some of his favorite teaching props. How many of you remember Mr. Tenney? Yes. King Dodo? Yes. I had a Mr. Tenney up here and he disappeared. That's okay. And as a final nod and gesture to that love of joy and wonder, this service, as Chris has said, is one of Dave's own meticulous creation. What would Dave do? Dave would approach everything from a place of humility. Dave was a unique person in the music and arts world. He never wanted to be in the limelight. He was always wanting the spotlight to be on his students. Dave was never a look at me kind of person. He was more of a let's look at you and let's celebrate your accomplishments kind of person. I witnessed this humility in Dave in settings both large and small. When Dave and Mary decided to retire from the children's choir, we wanted to send them out with a big bang. We asked Dave and Mary to lead all of the children's choir singers in the finale of the spring concert as a salute to their amazing 23 years of work with hundreds and hundreds of children. In typical Dave fashion, he demurred. He invited Mark and Barb Puchala, the founders of the children's choir, to help lead the finale, and in the end, creating a perfect bookend for their combined efforts leading the children's choir for over 20 years. Again, he would not allow the moment to be about Dave, but insisted it be about the singers whose lives he so richly touched. What would Dave do? Dave would thoughtfully listen and carefully respond. This was the trait that made Dave such a good friend and an amazing leader. In personal one-on-one conversations, Dave had a way of making you feel like he was really, truly listening to you. In large groups or meetings, he had a knack for thoughtfully listening to every viewpoint, then carefully responding to everyone's concerns. Those traits, paired with Dave's seemingly endless well of patience and calmness, made everyone feel that they were being treated with fairness and respect. When Dave served as the TCAP's music department chair, he was tasked with supervising over 30 Type A music educators. A bit like snake wrangling. We can laugh about it now, and we do. But we can all remember many, many meetings when things got heated, and in the midst of all that turmoil, there would sit Dave sitting calmly, patiently listening to everyone's concerns, and then he would finally speak and treat everyone with fairness and respect, trying to guide all of his unruly children to common ground and a place of understanding. One of the lighter and funnier moments during Dave's final days came during his last stint in the hospital, just before he was returned home for hospice care. During one visit, I arrived in Dave's room to find Dave surrounded by Mary and the Puchalas and our good friend Russ Larimer. The conversation quickly turned to how difficult Russ and I had been for Dave. How much trouble we had made for Dave with our constant bickering back and forth. Russ and I both jointly began apologizing again for our misdeeds. It wasn't the first time. Our apologies quickly turned to laughter, though, when Mary shared that earlier that day, Pat Brumbaugh and Flournoy had been there to offer their abject apologies as well. Side note, that day will forever be known as the Day of Atonement. We may not have recognized it back in the day, but we all appreciate so much now how much Dave's patience and calmness helped guide us to become better educators and better people. What would Dave do? Dave would make everyone feel special. This seems to be the universally shared experience amongst everyone who knew Dave. He had a way of making everyone feel special. I've had many wonderful conversations with friends and colleagues after Dave passed away about what made Dave so unique, and everyone seemed to have the sense that they were special to Dave. He had an easy and natural way of making people feel that way. During his final days, Dave and Mary received many messages and cards and well wishes from friends, colleagues, and former students. Almost every one of these heartfelt notes included a story about how Dave had made them feel special, about how he had saw within each person the best version of who they could be. Each of these stories had a common ending. Dave, because of all you did for me, you changed my life. Dave made everyone feel special because he believed everyone was special and because he always saw the best in everyone. To try and measure Dave's impact on our community is impossible and frankly overwhelming. Just imagine all the students, singers, parents, colleagues, friends, family that Dave has touched throughout his long life. The more you learn about Dave's involvement within the Traverse City community, the more you realize that he is often that common thread that runs through the tapestry of the music and arts community. If you put two musicians together, I can guarantee they'll both know Dave and they'll both respect, admire, and love him. Dave may have served many roles during his full life: son, brother, husband, father, administrator, conductor, lecturer, advisor, but within all those roles, there's one constant, that of the role of teacher. I started my time by saying that I was Dave's friend and colleague, but I was also his student, and he was one of my greatest teachers. Thank you.
His name is not in the program, but I want to recognize Steve Hobson, a friend of the family, to come forward and offer a remark. Steve? No? Okay. Pardon me. Then I would like to recognize Michael. Oh, is Steve here? Excuse me. Please. Are you Steve? Yeah. Please. Come right up, sir.
Thank you for being here today to celebrate the life of Dave Parrish, and a wonderful, rich life it was. Rich with the love of family, his many friends, and the countless number of students he taught for more than 5 decades. Dave was truly a Renaissance man. He loved his music, of course, but he also relished live theater, the cinema, literature, and the visual arts, from the smallest local gallery to the Dennis Museum to the Art Institute of Chicago. Dave just plain loved to learn about, teach, and experience all aspects of the arts. I first met Dave in the fall of 1963. We had recently arrived in Mount Pleasant, where my dad had just assumed the position of choral director at CMU. He was conducting the fall musical production of Oklahoma and introduced me to Dave, who had the role of Herman. This role was that of a quiet, mild-mannered cowboy who was pushed around a lot and never defended himself. Finally, near the end of the show, he stands up to his tormentors, thrusts his arm in the air, and exclaims, "I made a fist." Well, unlike the character he portrayed, Dave never failed to stand up with courage for what he believed to be right and true in all things. No more so than a role that truly fit him, that of a strong advocate for the arts. It must also be said that in the 56 years I've known him, this was the only time I ever saw Dave raise his fist against anyone for any reason. But then he never had to drive in Chicago traffic, like we did on the way up here. He was one of the kindest, most generous, intelligent, humble men I've ever had the privilege of knowing. It's truly an honor to call him my friend, and I will miss him. When we drove up to visit Dave and Mary about a week before he died, he wanted to talk about some of our most memorable outdoor experiences doing what he loved, hunting and fishing. I'd like to take a few minutes to share 2 of those memories, a favorite of mine and then one of Dave's, so they can now be your memories as well. I fondly recall the first time we went bird hunting. Sharon and I had just moved to Traverse City to begin our new teaching jobs. Upon our arrival in the fall of 1970, we reconnected with Dave and Mary, and I soon received a call from Dave asking if I would like to go bird hunting. Well, I'd never done this before, let alone use a shotgun. The infamous shotgun, Len. But I got my license, purchased the requisite and stylish orange hat and vest, and off we went. Before entering the woods, Dave thought it might be a good idea for me to do a little target practice. He had a very nice shotgun, and I borrowed his single-barrel shotgun. The one-shot wonder, I later called it. Anyway, we went to a remote location, and Dave brought about half a dozen tin cans for me to shoot and placed them in a row on a large log. I think he just wanted to see if I could actually pull the trigger and come close to hitting a target. Well, since I did have a shotgun, it didn't take much skill to send those poor, innocent, motionless, defenseless cans off to can heaven before we headed into the woods. Well, beginner's luck definitely kicked in, because by the end of the day, I had 4 woodcock to take home for dinner, and using my one-shot wonder, Dave had exactly 0. Well, I was pretty sure he was never going to ask me to go hunting again. Well, of course he did. And we spent many wonderful fall days tramping through the woods. But it never was really about bagging game birds. It was about a couple of friends spending time together in the quiet environment of the woods around Bass Lake near Omena. The only sounds to be heard were an occasional white-tailed deer jumping out from its hiding place, or our whistling back and forth so we always knew where each of us were in the thick brush. And then the sudden adrenaline rush of a woodcock or a partridge taking flight mere feet in front of us. The incredible beauty of October in the woods, with scents of pine and cedar, along with the red, gold, and yellow of the leaves around us, made it all worthwhile. Which is a good thing, because most of the time we spent our buckshot defoliating the local Michigan tree population. Dave's first love in the outdoors was, of course, fishing. We spent many hours in his boat fishing on Silver Lake and some smaller lakes in the area. But when he and Mary purchased the land on the aforementioned Bass Lake, this became pretty much our sole destination. In all the years of being on this lake, we never failed to catch fish. Strangely enough, though, when we were reminiscing about our experiences there, one of Dave's favorite memories had relatively nothing to do with the actual act of catching fish. It was a warm, sunny day when we arrived at his fishing cabin on the shoreline of Bass Lake. The structure was literally a small, really small, homemade cabin, sitting lightly attached, I might say, on a foundation of blocks with no power, water, or any comforts of home. It had a sleeping area and a small screen porch with a little space for cooking, room for a couple of chairs, and a small deck in front of the porch. We were in the process of loading our equipment into the boat when we looked at the horizon to the west and saw nothing but black clouds rapidly approaching. We looked at each other and almost in unison said, "Oh, blank." Feel free to insert your own word here. We raced back to the cabin, lowered all the wooden covers on the screens of the porch, and literally, hung on as the wind and the rain hit with a vengeance. If it were not for a small row of trees between the cabin and the water, I think we might have reenacted the tornado scene from The Wizard of Oz. Undeterred, as soon as the weather passed, we bailed out the water out of the boat and were soon on the lake to have one of our better days catching fish. Dave and I always considered Bass Lake to be a little slice of heaven. God willing, there is a Bass Lake in heaven just crammed full of hungry fish, and I hope Dave will save a seat on the boat for me. Thank you.
I'm honored to invite one of Dave and Mary's sons, Michael, to come forward and share your words.
This is an adventure, said a reflective Steve Zissou in the final line of dialogue in The Life Aquatic, a favorite film of mine. Now, in the afternoon, it's a windy day, the sky full of hazy cloud cover, yet enough sunlight to set the shadows of our great backyard trees dancing to the whim of the winds. On the porch, I am armed to the hilt with the strongest coffee any mortal man should ever consume, a pack of smokes, ethereal music, a book of Jim Harrison poems, and a lavender candle that flickers in the breeze, impossibly staying lit in spite of the constant wind. This is your seat. I see now with your eyes. I feel with your heart and love with your great light. I am there with you in your ancient Illumicraft at twilight, soaring with your joy on the glass lake as the final loon call echoes and fades into infinity. endlessly ballooning out from the canyon hills. In an image, you are standing to my left, your sure and constant hand on my right shoulder. Looking through the glass, you are with me. Half of my blood, winding through the hills and valleys of all that I can perceive with your consciousness. The illusion of separation now utterly destroyed in this moment. You gently descend. Your effortless silence fills all the space I inhabit. You cast forth, and I am caught in the lines of all the music. The calm kindness and warmth of your sparkling, bright blue eyes, rosy cheeks, and blissful smile that sets a frayed spirit to rest. Your adventure seems impossible. I'm not saying goodbye. I am greeting you and welcome you to all that spins, all the spheres, the dragons, the creations, the morning light, the nights of all times gathered, as white canvases are filled with bursting shapes, that night watch that first caught you across the Atlantic so long ago, the reach of your gift to all of breathing humanity, and to your final gaze. You slept to the greeting of shattered worlds repaired, the last moment of positivity, your bottomless optimism actualized. The truth you lived by played out before you. You waited and you watched and saw with perfect blue vision the endless sky of love open before you, and with poise and grace you dove in, a fish into the glass, the ripples of which continue to vibrate through the great halls and cathedrals of the past, yet ever present, in constant motion, to be, as you always were, infinite. I'd like to invite you to refer to the first page of your programs. I would invite you to read this along with me. It's called The Adventure. Paddling my way across the waters of life, I suddenly discover that I am in control of my destiny. Time seems immaterial as I consider the direction of my craft. I move steadily across the currents and the tides. My travel is shrouded in fog, but I do not falter. I have the knowledge that I alone pilot my journey. I have the faith that love and trust carry me forward. I know that the future holds great promise. I believe that I will succeed and reach my destination. You wrote this for me on my 30th birthday. I read this to you the day before you died. I could see the parallels and the similarities in the words that you wrote. You wrote this for me, and now I read it once more. This is an adventure. This is a poem by Jim Harrison called The Present. I'm sitting on the lip of this black hole, a well that descends to the center of the earth. With a big telescope aimed straight down, I see a red dot of fire and the beast howling. My back suppurating with disease, the heart lurches left and right, the brain sings its ditties. Everywhere, blank white movies wait to be seen. The skylark flew within inches of the rocks before it stopped and rose again. The cost of flight is landing. You have given me the greatest gift. Your birth, a reminder to me of the realization and discovery of that great mathematical constant pi, stretching out its decimals to the eager gulps of the infinitely flat universe, toward the expanding red dawn of new time. I see you there, gently conducting the stars, your arms slowly reaching out to that highest harmonic, the ringing bell of all time, soaring, spinning the great web as a morning mist leaves droplets clinging, and I see you in every diamond of reflected light. Forever may you soar as we rocket forth. I welcome you, my Father, to all that you created, all you loved, all you taught, all you guided, and all that will be. I love you with all that is left of me. Your gift given in all the spheres that you set in motion, in all these eyes that see you now, in the blanket space of transience and permanence, Dave's constant is out there, in all that moves. He moves us. He moves me. As a gentle symphony sets over the horizon, I say hello, and know as sure as the grace of gravity falls that you are here. I love you, Dad.
Thank you, Mike. You, sir, are your father's son. Amen, church? It's as basic a human need as food and water and rest. We all need teachers in our lives. Not just until we're in our early 20s, but really all across our lives. That is, if we're to have any hope of thriving as spiritually awake people. But how blessed a thing it is when our teachers themselves are people who choose to be spiritually awake as well. We've all been hearing today about what an effective and enthusiastic teacher was Dave Parrish in this earthly life. And I look up in this choir loft and I can almost see him with his animated posture leaning in, bringing in the choir. I'd like to think that God Almighty has a place for Dave to teach in the next world as well. I mean, why waste all that enthusiasm? Would you agree, master teachers are the ones who ask, how could this be made better? How can we make the concepts, the musical notes, the art jump off the pages and engage the learner's imagination and maybe their very soul? Jesus was a master teacher, often speaking in riddle stories that we've come to call parables, able to reduce huge reams of ideas into a distilled one-liner that could open you up or haunt you for the rest of your days. A one-liner such as, try loving God with all your heart and soul and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Dave fed his soul at the feet of master teacher Jesus on many a Sunday, sitting next to Mary right back there in the fifth row. On many a Sunday, we'd greet each other after worship, clasp hands and nod, often without speaking a word to each other, but knowing we'd been in the presence of something so much greater than ourselves. But Dave became a good teacher in his own right because he learned as well from the likes of Rembrandt and Van Gogh and Beethoven and Mozart, and I'm told Led Zeppelin. You know, even when he was suffering in his cancer, Dave Parrish, I believe, was still seeking light, seeking meaning, and learning more. I'd shared with him a book by the great Christian psychiatrist Gerald May, and we'd talk about it from time to time, a quote we'd read in May's writings. Thinking about today, these last few days, I went back and found this line of Gerald May's that speaks to the beauty and gifts in a man, even while struggling with cancer. The line goes, maybe sometimes, in the midst of things going terribly wrong, something is going just right. I witnessed that in Dave in recent weeks. I imagine many of you did as well. So I believe the question for all of us in the house today, as we honor the best of Dave Parrish, is to ask ourselves, who are the teachers that we're following around? Because we should be clear on that. Clear enough that we will hear their wisdom above other voices. Clear enough that we will thank them if they are still in this realm. Clear enough that we will hold tight to their lessons and integrate them into our path and give them our own spin. Dave Parrish knew how to do this and would have it no other way. Thanks be to God for the life of Dave Leonard Parrish, who now joins the great cloud of witnesses. After so many words spoken today, could we have a space of quiet where in our own way we could release and commend Dave's spirit unto God's great Spirit everlasting? And after a moment of this quiet, we will hear the music of the great Cesar Franck. Peace that just might help in witnessing Dave's spirit ascending.
The road not taken. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and, sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one, as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
May your life burn too much till you're burning like a starry sky. Just one wish, then say goodbye. May your wings fly too high till in flying you can touch the sky. For though the oceans may be wider, and though the mountains may last longer, not even heaven will burn brighter. You're not leaving, you're only changing. Take good care, Godspeed you on. May your heart love too long, till in loving you can lose your way. And as I sing this song for you, may your dreams come shining through, till in shining they can light your way. For though the oceans may be wider, and though the mountains may last longer, not even heaven will burn brighter. You're not leaving, you're only changing. Fare thee well, keep in touch. May your life burn too much till you're burning like a starry sky. Till you're burning like a starry sky. Till you're burning like a starry sky.
Thank you, Paul. A reading of the Psalms of Dave Parrish's choosing for this day. I have heard this psalm many times, as have you, but never until today did I consider this is a psalm written for someone with multiple intelligences and experiential learning. See what you think. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, for he makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters, and he restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they are comforting me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil until my cup overflows. Oh, surely, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. so appreciate how in our Christian tradition we honor that the human is soul, mind, and body. And so in a moment like this, we take a moment to honor the body. Dave's body carried our brother as long as it could. Think of the words of the poet Mary Oliver. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. When the time comes to let it go, let it go. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. Blessed are those who die in the Lord, says the Spirit, for they now rest from their labors, and their good works do follow them. May the peace and mercy and grace of God, who is triune, creator, redeemer, sustainer, abide with you and me in our living this day, every day. Amen. As the children's choir comes forward now, I want you to know the good Methodist hospitality of women in this church would like you to come downstairs and be a part of a meal with the family. I imagine there's a few more stories to be told. I hope following their blessing, you will follow the family downstairs.